Seriously, just because our dads are good friends, I'm being pushed into this marriage. I'm not young anymore, and Dad's been on my case to get married soon.
So you don't love your wife, Frank?
Of course not. An older woman like her. I'm just marrying her for appearances. The only one I love is you, Tracy.
I felt a chill run down my spine hearing this conversation. So this was the true nature of my husband, Frank. And this woman, Tracy, who was she? Frank, who was about to get married tomorrow, was boldly engaging in such behavior. I wanted to confront him right then and there, but I paused to think. Merely complaining wouldn't satisfy me after such a terrible betrayal. That's when I had a great idea. I quickly sent a message to my dad on my mobile phone. Dad, is everyone still there? I'm going to send a video call soon. Make sure you watch it and show it to all our relatives, please. Then I broadcasted it live in front of everyone. Everyone, it's starting. At that moment, the mobile phone screen I sent out elicited gasps of surprise from both families. My name is Sabrina, a 45-year-old office worker. I struggled with not being married after my 40s. Maybe I had too high ideals about marriage. I had a cousin 10 years older than me. She got married at 21 during the economic boom. Her husband was well educated, high earning, and tall. As a child, I envied her marriage. So when I grew up, I dreamed of a marriage like my cousin's. But by the time I entered middle school, the economy had worsened. By adulthood, meeting such an ideal man had become difficult. Many of my friends got married, talking about compromise and calculation, but I didn't want to marry just for the sake of it. Before I knew it, I was over 40. I started to feel the pressure. Having lost Mom at a young age and raised in a single-parent home, Dad was my only strong supporter. It was 4 years ago when Dad suddenly fell ill and was hospitalized. I was so worried about Dad that I visited the hospital every day after work. That's where I met Frank, who had just become the director of this hospital. Frank had taken over as the director from his predecessor. His dad, Hector, the former director and now chairman, had been friends with my dad, Glenn, since high school. Maybe that's why Frank often talked to me when I was in the patient's room. One day, as I was about to head home, Frank called out to me from behind.
Would you like to have dinner together? If you don't mind.
Surprised by his sudden invitation, yet secretly pleased, I gladly accepted. Yes, I'd love to. That night, we had dinner together, and our conversation flowed effortlessly, talking about our parents, among other things. It turned out he had lost his mom early too, and we found a lot of common ground. As dinner came to an end, Frank looked at me seriously and said,
Would you consider dating me?
His sudden confession took me aback. But he was slim, tall, and took pride in his work. I thought he might just be the one I'd been searching for, and answered without hesitation. Yes, I'd be happy to. After 3 years of dating, he proposed to me. Considering our work schedules, we decided to postpone the wedding for a year. First, we found a new place to live and moved in together before registering our marriage. All that was left was the wedding ceremony. I thought I was finally going to make Dad proud. However, as the wedding approached, troubling events began to cloud over our relationship. It started sometime after we had registered our marriage. When we were living together, I had left most of my belongings at my parents' house. After registering, I began moving them little by little to our new home. Since I continued working after our marriage, I was often out, leaving valuables like jewelry and handbags at my parents' house. Then one day, when we were about to go out on a holiday, Frank noticed me fetching a handbag from my parents' house and said,
Sabrina, isn't it a hassle to go back every time we go out? This house is secure. You should bring your valuables here.
Indeed, when we bought this house, we subscribed to a 24-hour surveillance service. It seemed safer than leaving them at my parents'. Since then, I decided to move all my belongings to our new home. But after a while, something strange started happening. Each time I returned from work, I noticed my possessions gradually disappearing. There were no signs of outside intrusion, which was odd. I thought about asking Frank, but it felt awkward, as if I were accusing him. And the missing items were typically things a woman would use, like cosmetics and accessories. Even my favorite shampoo in the bathroom kept disappearing. It was a rare item, only available through the official website. It was odd that only my shampoo kept vanishing. Frank used his own shampoo, so it didn't make sense for him to take mine. I was bothered by it, but didn't bring it up with Frank, wanting to avoid looking incapable of managing my belongings. Little did I know, this would lead to a regrettable situation. And the wedding day was drawing closer. Frank's night shifts continued as usual, and he often left on Sundays and holidays for conferences. With so much to prepare for the wedding and barely any time to see each other, things were getting difficult. Reluctantly, I went to the wedding venue with Dad and Hector for the wedding preparations. Thankfully, Frank had already taken care of the venue, date, and invitations, so it was mainly about finalizing the wedding details and wedding favors. Yet there were things I really wanted to decide with Frank, but he just said to pick the attire myself. I waited for a moment when we were both home and asked Frank, "Hey, I wish you would come to the meetings sometimes. Can't you skip the weekend conferences just once in a while?" When I said this, Frank seemed a bit flustered and avoided eye contact.
No. I have to be at those conferences. As for the dress, I'm fine with whatever you like, Sabrina. You and Glenn can handle the wedding and wedding favors. Please, I'm counting on you.
I was disappointed by Frank's words. A conference that you have to attend, and right before a wedding of all times.
You wouldn't understand, Sabrina. You're not in the medical field. It's just something I can't miss.
Frank's dismissive response made me suspicious, but with the wedding so close, I didn't want to argue. So I reluctantly agreed to his request. Then, one day, while I was at work in the morning, I realized I had forgotten some documents at home for an afternoon meeting. Oh no, I've been so busy with work and wedding preparations. I forgot. I need to go back and get them. I explained the situation to my boss and was allowed to go home during my break. Fortunately, our new home wasn't too far from the office, so I could make the round trip during the break. But as I approached the house, I noticed something odd in the living room. I couldn't believe my eyes. One person was Frank, seemingly back from a night shift. But there was also a young woman, a stranger sitting next to him on the sofa. Frank had his arm around her shoulder, talking to her. I tried to listen from the outside, but couldn't hear anything due to the soundproofing. Curious about who she might be, but short on time, I quietly entered through the kitchen door, grabbed the documents, and left. I didn't want to believe that Frank might be cheating right before our wedding, but they seemed too close for comfort. Suppressing my urge to confront them, I returned to work. I made it to the meeting on time, but couldn't concentrate. Frank always said he was busy with conferences and night shifts, but was that true? Or was he using that as an excuse to meet someone else? Such thoughts kept distracting me at work. After that, opportunities to see Frank on weekends became even rarer. I thought about checking with Hector, but couldn't bring myself to ask. If Frank was lying, it would worry Hector too. With the wedding approaching, I felt increasingly anxious. How I wished Mom was here to talk to. I didn't want to trouble anyone, so I had no friends to confide in. All the friends attending the wedding were happy for my happiness. I couldn't let them down by sharing my doubts. I hoped that the glimpse of Frank with that unknown woman was just an illusion. I was trying to escape reality in my mind. With these feelings, I faced the eve of my wedding day. Frank, despite it being such an important night, said he'd be late due to an evening shift. As he left for work, he suggested,
"Since it's the night before our wedding, why don't you spend it with Glenn at your parents' house? I'll be home late."
Feeling restless at home, I decided to take his advice and stay at my parents' house. I timed my arrival with Dad's return from work. When I got there, Dad greeted me at the door.
"Sabrina, you're back. Actually, we're having a pre-wedding celebration with both families right now. Everyone's already here."
Seeing many shoes at the entrance, I was surprised and entered. Everyone applauded and greeted me with cheers as I walked in. "Sabrina, congratulations!" "Thank you." I greeted everyone a bit shyly, and I was blessed and briefly joined the pre-wedding celebration, but I thought it best to rest for tomorrow. I had a drink and returned home. Back home, I felt suddenly exhausted and decided to skip the bath, thinking I could take it in the morning, and went straight to bed. I fell asleep by 8 p.m., but woke up in the middle of the night. It was past 11 p.m. Wide awake, I decided to take a bath. As I got out of bed and headed downstairs, I heard noises from the bathroom. I thought Frank might be taking a bath, but I also heard faint voices, including a woman's. Could it be Frank and that young woman from the living room together again? With a surge of anxiety, I quietly peeked into the bathroom. There they were, Frank and that same woman from before. They were about to get into the tub together. It was clear she was his affair partner. Then Frank said something shocking.
"Seriously, just because our dads are good friends, I'm being pushed into this marriage. I'm not young anymore, and Dad's been on my case to get married soon."
"So, you don't love your wife, Frank?"
"Of course not. An older woman like her. I'm just marrying her for appearances. The only one I love is you, Tracy."
I felt a chill hearing this conversation. This was Frank's true nature. And this woman, Tracy, who was she? Frank was boldly doing this the day before our wedding. Unabashed, she even said something odd. "But Frank, you're amazing, building such a big house and buying me nice things."
"Well, Dad did contribute a bit to this house, and Sabrina buys her own stuff with her earnings. That kind of woman doesn't need to be supported. That's why I can afford to buy a condo for you."
"Wow, I'm so happy. But won't your wife notice?"
"Don't worry about it. She hasn't even realized that her jewelry and stuff are missing."
"Oh, I took those. Her taste is so tacky, so I sold them all." My belongings that had been disappearing. It was Frank's doing after all. Giving them to her, that's unforgivable. I felt my fists trembling with anger. Then Tracy picked up my shampoo. "This shampoo is really good. I'll take it home again today."
Why not? She shops online all the time. If she runs out of that shampoo, she'll just order more.
So it was Tracy who had been taking my frequently missing shampoo. She acted like everything in this house was hers. But more importantly, my heart felt torn apart. Here I was, on the eve of my wedding, and Frank was betraying me like this. I wanted to confront him in the bathroom, but I thought better of it. Such a harsh betrayal deserved more than just complaints. That's when I had a great idea. I quickly messaged Dad on my mobile phone. "Dad, is everyone still there? I'm going to send a video call soon. Please watch it and show it to all our relatives, please." After sending the message, it was read immediately.
What's up? Everyone's still here. Are you going to give a speech for the pre-wedding celebration?
You'll see. Oh, and make sure to record the video I'm sending. Then I switched to the video call on my messaging app and quietly opened the bathroom door. "Everyone, it's starting." I began to narrate the situation, showing Frank and Tracy on the screen. They were caught perfectly, doing something they shouldn't in the bathroom.
Oh my gosh, what is this?
"Wow, stop it, please." The two panicked at the sudden revelation. Ignoring them, I continued my narration. "Ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, the groom-to-be who's supposed to get married tomorrow is in the bath with a young lady." I could hear the commotion and even screams from my relatives at home through the call. Hector, watching the video, shouted in anger.
What the hell is this?
I continued narrating, feeling sorry for shocking Hector. "Frank and... who might this be? How long has this been going on?"
Sabrina, enough is enough.
"Oops, the cheating husband is getting angry for some reason. Does he understand his position?" I kept narrating while Frank showed his anger unabashedly. Next to Frank, Tracy was trembling, clinging to him. Seeing the two of them through the screen, Hector looked furious, almost demonic. Snatching the mobile phone from Dad, he shouted while looking at the screen.
"Frank, what are you doing at such a crucial time? And that woman with you, isn't she Tracy, the nurse from our hospital?"
So Tracy was a nurse working at Frank's hospital. I continued my narration, as if trying to maintain composure despite my shock. An unexpected revelation. The mistress turns out to be none other than the bridegroom, Frank's subordinate.
"Sabrina, enough, I get it,"
Hector said, cutting off the call. Knowing his son was having an affair with a subordinate at home must have shocked Hector. I regretted making Hector witness this. Overwhelmed by catching Frank cheating, I was lost in regret. Seeing me like this, Frank taunted.
"See, you made Dad angry. How are you going to fix this? It's a loss of face for me as the hospital's successor. If anything happens, you're responsible."
"Yeah, you should be grateful for even getting a pity marriage. Know your place," Tracy added. They didn't see their actions as wrong, instead blaming me. It was as if I was the one who had done something wrong. Filled with frustration, I couldn't find the words to respond. Then the doorbell rang. Ding dong! The monitor showed Dad and Hector, but not just them. The relatives from the pre-wedding celebration were also there. I immediately opened the door and let everyone in. Dad looked at me, concern etched on his face.
"Sabrina, are you okay? It must have been hard." but it's all right now. We're all here for you.
Dad, thank you. Seeing Dad, I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. I had been holding in so much pain and frustration. Tears streaming, I sat down sobbing. My relatives comforted me, stroking my head and back. I broke down crying uncontrollably. Hector, upon entering, rushed straight to the bathroom. Without knocking, he flung open the door.
Hey, Frank, what on earth are you doing? Oh my gosh, Dad.
Wow, what is this? Enough! Frank and Tracy were as surprised as when I had walked in. Then, one by one, the relatives followed.
What's going on? Why are you all here like this?
No, everyone, please leave. Furious with Frank and Tracy's lack of remorse, Hector became even angrier.
Do you two realize what you're doing? Get out of there now. We'll talk later.
Do young girls today have no shame? My aunt said, looking at Tracy in disgust. Frank and Tracy, covering themselves with towels, hurriedly got out of the tub and started searching for their clothes. However, their clothes were nowhere to be found. I had secretly hidden them before filming with my mobile phone.
Oh, where did our clothes go?
Frank said, confused and still wrapped in a towel. I almost burst out laughing. Tracy just sat there, looking frightened. Everyone watched them, dumbfounded.
Just let us get dressed in the bedroom.
We'll catch a cold like this, Tracy pleaded.
No,
came the firm reply. No, help me, please. Hector was unrelenting, probably thinking they might escape if allowed to dress.
Well, sit down for now, Frank. Why did you do this? Explain yourself. Well, I married Sabrina because you told me to, right? She wasn't really my type. What? You never said anything like that. I had to obey you as your successor. I thought I'd lose the director's position if I defied you.
Hector seemed taken aback by Frank's explanation. The relatives all stared at Frank, stunned. Married just because his parents pushed him into it? Hearing this, I felt an unbearable sadness. Noticing my distress, Hector spoke kindly to me.
Sabrina, I'm sorry for the pain Frank has caused you. I truly apologize.
No, it's not your fault, Hector. Please don't apologize.
But to think that this would happen just before your wedding.
His words made my heart ache even more. My long-awaited wedding. Now, I couldn't bear the thought of it. Seeing my hesitation, Dad put a hand on my shoulder.
Sabrina, you don't have to go through with this. I'll explain everything to the guests.
That meant the wedding was off. I couldn't imagine continuing a married life with Frank. It seemed the only choice was to cancel the wedding. Hearing this, Frank said with a relieved smile,
Haha, so I'm free now. No, that's not how it works.
Hector responded sternly.
What? Why? The wedding's off, isn't it? You had an affair with a young nurse from our hospital. Right now, only the family knows, but soon the whole hospital will hear of it. We can't keep a man like that as the director.
That's right. Frank has shamed us all. He's no longer fit to be the successor. The other relatives nodded in agreement.
Does that mean I'm being fired? Yes, you are,
Hector affirmed, to which Frank started making absurd excuses.
That's ridiculous. I was seduced by her. She used her youth to tempt me. It's not my fault.
Frank pointed at Tracy, trying to put all the blame on her. How unmanly of him. Tracy, with tears in her eyes, looked shocked. That's awful, Frank. You said you loved only me. That you married her because your parents forged you. Was everything you promised me a lie? Frank's poor excuses seemed to backfire, especially as Tracy revealed everything in front of everyone.
Idiot, don't say unnecessary things.
Frank, red-faced, sat down in embarrassment. Hector looked down at Frank and said in a dismayed tone,
Frank, I'm so disappointed in you. I would have considered a more lenient approach if you had shown any remorse. I would have even pleaded with a known hospital for you. What? Dad, you should have told me that earlier. Fool, how twisted is your head?
Hector scolded Frank with an expression I had never seen before. Even Frank was silenced by this. Watching Frank, Hector took a deep breath and started to explain.
I wanted to repay a man who had been kind to me. That's why I wanted you to make Sabrina, his granddaughter, happy. Now I can't even face her grandfather. What? What does that mean?
Frank tilted his head in confusion. I didn't know either that my grandfather had been Hector's benefactor. My grandfather had passed away when I was young. Hector then elaborated on my grandfather's story. Hector had struggled financially when starting his hospital, and my maternal grandfather, then a bank president, had helped him. My grandfather frequently visited the hospital for stomach ulcers, where Hector was his doctor. Hector had aspired to own his hospital and consulted my grandfather, who even helped finance it. Hector had fallen in love with my mother, his daughter, and confessed, but she was already dating my father. Hector even shared his bittersweet love story. After finishing his story, Hector looked at Frank again.
So, Frank, your position today is partly thanks to Sabrina's grandfather. That's why I wanted you to make her happy.
Tracy then spoke up. What? That's just your parents' convenience. How could you decide your son's marriage partner for such a reason? That's terrible. Silence! The mistress should keep quiet. No, scary. Frank, help me. Tracy clung to Frank, pleading for his help. Frank brushed off Tracy's hand and shook his head slightly.
I'm sorry, Tracy. There's nothing I can do now.
No. Hector then addressed a sobbing Tracy.
That's how it is, unfortunately. Tracy, you'll have to leave the hospital.
What? That's not fair.
It's necessary. Your actions compromise the hospital's reputation.
Tracy was visibly shaken by Hector's words. Seeing this, I decided to add my piece. By the way, I'll be seeking alimony. Even if you object, we have evidence. But I've been fired. I spent so much on furniture thinking Frank would buy me a condo. And now that's gone too. I only have loan repayments left. What am I supposed to do now? Well, that's what you get for getting involved with a married man. Consider it your punishment. Tracy burst into loud tears at my response. Ignoring her, I turned to Frank. And yes, speaking of alimony, I'll be expecting it from you too, Frank. Also, I'll get the divorce papers tomorrow, so be sure to sign them.
That's right. I can't forgive you for betraying Sabrina, my benefactor's granddaughter. You're no longer welcome in our hospital or family. You're disowned.
The others echoed. That's right.
That's right.
Frank and Tracy, now utterly defeated, slumped in despair. I filed the divorce papers, and the divorce from Frank was finalized. After the divorce, I put the custom-built house up for sale, but it was hard to find a buyer due to its unique design. Eventually, it sold for less than half the original price. I received the proceeds as part of the property settlement and alimony. Frank lost his wife and wealth. Disowned by his parents, he couldn't return home. Living alone, he struggled to find a new job. I knew this because our fathers still kept in touch. Dad said every time he met Hector, he would hear complaints about Frank. Frank, still disowned, would turn up at his parents' house, begging at the door.
"Forgive me, please."
Hector never let him in. I also heard rumors that Tracy went to Frank, still holding a grudge about not getting the condo. She's apparently pestering him to return to being a doctor to afford a luxurious lifestyle. Frank, exasperated, even called me.
"Sabrina, I was wrong to be fooled by a young girl. Let's get back together."
I replied similarly. I was wrong to be deceived by your status. I won't choose a man based on his job or looks again. Let's live our lives separately, so goodbye.
"Hey, wait a minute."
Before he could respond, I hung up and blocked his number, emails, and messages. Dad said Tracy started working at a nightclub, and Frank took part-time jobs while job hunting. But their affair had become well known among medical professionals in the area, so Dad says that it's unlikely Frank will find another job. Whenever medical professionals visit Tracy's workplace, their affair becomes the talk of the town. Consequently, Tracy is often fired due to bad publicity. Yet Tracy still hopes for Frank to return to his medical career. Desperately, they moved to a remote countryside, with Tracy dragging a reluctant Frank along. Now, no one knows where they've ended up. Meanwhile, I moved back to my parents' house and commute to work from there. I'm not thinking about marriage for a while, not just because of my own failed marriage. Ironically, my cousin, who I thought had an ideal marriage, recently went through a gray divorce. However, she seems to be preparing for independence and is now living a fulfilling life with her work and hobbies. So I've decided to enjoy my time alone. Then, one day, a colleague from my department, Ian, approached me.
"It seems you've been through a lot recently."
Well, it's become kind of a story now. My divorce fiasco had become well known at work. While a bit embarrassing, I always responded with a smile when asked about it. Then Ian, looking serious, said to me,
"Actually, I've been interested in you, Sabrina, since I transferred here, but I thought you were engaged, so I had given up."
He then asked me out for lunch during the break. Ian, 2 years younger than me, had transferred to our company 3 years ago. We had been working in the same department ever since. I hadn't really noticed before, but he was always kind and subtly supportive, especially when I made mistakes. Perhaps someone like Ian could be my ideal partner. I hadn't planned on considering marriage again soon, but maybe I had overlooked a great person nearby all this time. A failure or two happens to everyone. Thinking about it, maybe I should be more open to this new opportunity. Approaching my mid-40s, I realize age doesn't matter when it comes to happiness. After all, life is once.